All right, well, we'll say good afternoon to everybody. My name is Rob Macedo, amateur radio call sign KD1CY. I'm the Eastern Mass Aries Section Emergency Coordinator and the Skywarn Coordinator for our Weather Service office in NWS Norton, Massachusetts, and also the Director of Operations for the VoIP Hurricane Net. The ARRL came to me and asked earlier this year to chair this panel discussion for this year, and I appreciate their faith and their relationship to be able to lead such a great panel. And we have a great group of speakers, and I'm going to warn you now, we're not going to be throwing up a lot of PowerPoint slides. We're going to have some initial discussion amongst ourselves and amongst the panelists, and then we're looking for a lot of interaction from all of you. Q&A, things that are on your minds. We want to hear about them and kind of work to figure through some of the topics that affect public service communications. Know there's a lot of talk and buzz around the new Aries strategic plan, and I also want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to do and educate folks about building relationships both with our agencies and amongst each other within amateur radio, because I got to tell you, one of the things I have realized over the last few years myself is how many relationships and people I've met through amateur radio through all this work, and a powerful thing that can be. So before we get going, I want to have the speakers all introduce themselves. Also, the Mars guys have an announcement that they would like to make, and then we'll get into some of the topics. So I'm going to just pass the mic down and have everybody introduce themselves, who they are, what they do, and if they want to, they can also say what got them interested in amateur radio.
So good afternoon, Paul English, Whiskey Delta 8 Delta Bravo Yankee, Chief of Army Mars. What got me interested in amateur radio was really my dad. He used to be a CB'er and heard about this thing called Field Day, and he said, "Boys, get in the car, we're going to go check this out." So that's how we got started.
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Stapchuk. I'm KD9DXM. I'm the Chief of Air Force Mars. I'm at Scott Air Force Base, and the Air Force got me interested into amateur radio. They put me in this job, and then I've learned from all of you what my responsibilities are. So, no, and from Paul.
Hey there, I'm Malcolm Kaiser with the Civil Air Patrol, Air Force Auxiliary, and my call is KG4G. What got me interested in amateur radio was the Air Force. I joined the Air Force in 1978 as an HF radio operator and opened my eyes to things that I enjoyed doing and still get to enjoy doing. So that's how I got here.
Hi, I'm Ross Merlin, the Program Manager of the Shared Resources HF radio program from the Department of Homeland Security. I grew up in the civil defense era, and emergency communications and not being a victim, being able to be somewhat self-sufficient attracted me to amateur radio. And people said, "You're a nerd, this is a nerd hobby, it's perfect for you."
Howdy, my name is Sarah Byrne. I am with FEMA External Affairs. I got interested first in disaster work and emergency response, volunteering with Red Cross since '99. And my public service career brought me full back circle to emergency management. And I love this world, and I love knowing the power that information has for helping people make good decisions. And so I got interested in radio, aspiring Hamette, taking my test this summer. Got interested in radio because I'm crafting messages all day, all night, but if I don't understand where it reaches or how it's getting there, or maybe limitations or advantages of different technology that is being used to transmit those messages, then I'm not making the best message possible. So.
All right, and we should have potentially one more panelist coming aboard. It's Marty Pottinger, KB3MXM, and if he shows up here, we'll have him do a quick intro, and he'll add to the questions and topics here. So as I said, the first thing we wanted to do is the Mars folks have an announcement on an exercise right here in the state of Ohio, and I'm going to let Paul English speak about that.
Okay, thanks. Quick show of hands, how many of you live here in Ohio? Okay. Next presentation is really for you all. I'd like to introduce Mr. Mark Jensen. He's from U.S. Northern Command, and we've got a couple of officers here from the Ohio National Guard that have just a quick conversation about an upcoming exercise.
Thank you, Paul. Good day. I'm Mark Jensen, U.S. Northern Command. I'm Whiskey Alpha 6, Mike Victor Tango, or as my father used to say, Mark Very Tall. My interest in amateur radio was when I was a kid. My father wouldn't let me go outside and play until I finished soldering the amplifier board on his Heath kit. So that kind of got me motivated to see what it was all about. At any rate, wanted to just take a couple minutes. At the end of next month, 25 to 27 June, we're doing a Vital Connection comm interoperability exercise. We go to different states, U.S. Northern Command in Colorado Springs, where I'm from. We sponsor these exercises. We work with the State National Guard and with the Emergency Management Agency for the respective states. And it's communications interoperability involving state, local, federal, military, amateur radio, ARES, MARS, shares, and those who push to talk and squeeze to listen. So it all works out. Structured 3-day exercise, and we especially a lot of emphasis on doing 5 megahertz interoperability between the amateur community, federal, and state and so on, because there's only special circumstances that can occur, and that has to be an emergency or an exercise. So that's going to be a great possibility for voice traffic as well as message, things like that. My colleagues, I have Major Demas and Major Bergman, who came out from the Guard, and they're going to be the planners. Major Demas is the main planner, and they're the ones that are kind of setting forth the path for what's going to go on for the exercise. So, at any rate, encourage you to participate if you can. For further information, like we did last month for an exercise in Wisconsin, station WWV and WWVH will both be putting out a voice broadcast at 10 minutes after the hour and 50 minutes after the hour that will have a 45-second message about the exercise and website and where to get more information. So we were trying to be off the grid, so we're using something off the grid. So at any rate, 10 minutes after the hour, 50 after the hour, more information, as well as we're available as well. Thank you, Paul.
So before we leave this topic, any questions about this exercise? Sounds like a great opportunity for folks in Ohio. All right. So thanks for that announcement and using some time here to hit up as many folks as we can for that opportunity for some training. So first thing we wanted to kind of hit off with is, so how many folks have heard about the ARES strategic plan and the new program? And okay, well, the word is out. That is goodness. So again, just going to kind of go through some of the high points of the plan. So I think the biggest thing, and this is something that I have been pushing out there within our Eastern Massachusetts section, is that there's a lot more training that is now being put into what's required to go kind of up in levels within ARES. So I think what's been great is we have the level 1 ARES member, which is kind of an associate member, doesn't have training. You can stay at that level. Obviously, we want folks to continue to progress, but folks, that maybe not have the time to do all the training, maybe are not interested in being in an EOC or a shelter or somewhere, but can participate in other ways. Maybe they're a net control for a specific net. Maybe they're a person that helps you maintain one of your critical repeaters, and he wants to be, involved within ARES. So you have that level kind of account for some of those folks. Then you have the level 2 area of membership, which is the ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800 courses. More of the training, the ECO 001, which the league, I'm very grateful to have seen, is not charging anybody for that course, which I think is very important. One of the things we've always said about ARES is There's no coerced costs really get involved other than the equipment that any amateur radio would buy and such. So I thought that was really good that was retained. And then kind of the level 3 membership, which gets into either more of the advanced ICS courses, and again, something that had been adjusted as we went through it. The 300 and 400 courses were something that some states think is very important and it's required. Other states, like my state, when I mentioned, hey, we're looking at requiring 300 and 400, they were like, well, for you guys, we're not quite as worried about that. So there's flexibility where you can take those classes or the professional development series of FEMA online classes, which I think in some ways are a lot more important. Learning how to manage volunteers, it's different from managing employees. I mean, I work in high tech and I manage employees, but how I manage employees is a little bit different than managing volunteers. And sometimes there's relationships between both. And some of the volunteer management has helped me in my professional career and vice versa. Some of those FEMA courses I think are very good for that, for the level 3 position. And that's for a lot of our ARIES leadership in trying to show agencies that we are serious about training. That said, I also think it's important that we're serious about the hams that maybe contribute in ways that aren't necessarily seen by agencies, but people that we know we need to make the things that we do in amateur radio work, have a level within the program if they so desire to go there. So I think that's very important. The other piece that I think is still maybe has some more work to do and such, but it was started and mentioned within the plan, is everything around the NTS and messaging and so forth. I think there's more work to do on that, but it was mentioned how there is an importance there to try to make that work as well. And I think that's the other thing about this. We talked about the ARIES program had not been restructured or looked at since, I think, its inception. You know, there have been a number of attempts, but nothing really changed. What I'm hoping is, after doing this kind of major catch-up of changes, that we are now in a place where maybe we can start to iterate the program as things change, not have to wait another 70 years to revamp the program, because quite frankly, I don't think we could afford that. And we have to be able to roll with those changes a bit to be able to continue to serve our agencies and such. So perspective on the ARIES plan. Any questions on the ARIES plan and how it is today, and things that you'd like to see that are different? Is there feedback on the plan since it's been, kind of put into effect since the program was introduced and put in effect with the board meeting in January? Yes.
As a county EC, I'd like to provide training to my group plan. So is there a train-the-trainer or something that we can go do as ARIES leadership to be able to bring that back down to our members? Is there presentations? Is there online forums?
So I know that in the advanced level, we also have the EC 016 class that's part of the level 3 training. But I'd like to I'm looking at a couple of the board members. I don't necessarily know if that's really truly train the trainer for EC 001. So I guess
specifically on the plan.
Right.
I want to give a presentation on what the changes are in the plan.
Oh, so just the actual plan itself. So not a train the trainer for a class per se. Okay, gotcha. So personally myself, I haven't really found that I needed that. What I basically did was I took the ARIES plan and I said, all right, what are the most important concepts when I went out to some of the clubs, because I did 2 or 3 club meetings in the last 6 months or so. And basically what I told them was the different tiers of membership, because that's different, and that definitely affects everybody that's in the program. So I focused on that piece, what the requirements are for each level, what each level is, and what you're able to do at each level. I focused on that piece, and I think that's the major part of it. Now, in certain sections, right, you may have other. I'm in Eastern Mass, you're in Ohio. You may have other things that you want your people to have that are, you guys are dictating on a more local level. So you'd want to incorporate that in it as well. But that's, the levels of membership, I think, are really the number one thing to communicate and what came out of the plan. None of the leadership titles changed. So I think that's a big part of it.
Speaking on the side of the board, there are different jurisdictions. Every jurisdiction, everybody in Aries in a different area has a different served agency. So your requirements are going to be the same. It's pretty hard to come up with a universal one-size-fits-all as far as the program. But I think if you just look at the levels, like you said, look at the different levels and generate a program based on what your level requirements are, which are really up to the section manager and what your served agencies are required to do. So that's my recommendation.
Okay. All right. Other questions on the strategic plan and in terms of communicating it? Other questions? One right there.
Well, as it stands, the way we read it is that level 2 doesn't get you anything. There's nothing that requires level 2 other than going to level 3. We can change that, I understand, but
there is. A lot of served agencies will not let a level 1 person in the EOC. You've got to have a minimum of level 2 to step foot in the EOC and work in the operations center. So there is a distinction, but once again, it depends on the served agency.
my thought is that if you're going to ask someone to step up a little bit, and especially if your served agency doesn't have any kind of restriction like that, I know like a lot of our Red Cross folks, that's not an issue. They just want somebody that knows what they're doing. Our thought was, if you're going to have an EC, they got to be level 2.
That is correct.
They don't have to be level 3.
They
can be level, but they can be level 2. And I mean, that's something, if you put it in the plan that an EC has to be level 2, then there's a reason to step up if there's not.
But once again, it goes back to what the served agency required.
Huh?
It's what the served agency required.
Well, I'm just saying, the served agencies may not require anything.
Then the section manager has the ability to put in any requirements that he wants. That's in the plan. ECs are supposed to be level 2. Yes.
Yeah. No, I was going to say the EC position already, I think, so Dale is saying that's level 2. I can go back and take a look at that, but I was pretty certain any leadership you had to, EC leadership you had to get to level 2. But I'll go back and look at that because that was my understanding. For level 3, that's for the DEC titles and above. If it's not, I think your point is valid because I think your point would be valid because there'd at least be a little bit more incentive. I mean, in our state, for what it's worth, they're not going around looking at people's ICS requirements per se, but I would say as a leader of the organization, the people I'm going to look for first are the ones that have that training. And I would only put other people that wouldn't have that training if I have a very solid relationship with them to understand that, their capabilities. That would be my take there.
But if you get a smart person that goes out and reads the plan,
yeah,
there's an issue there.
Yeah, no, agreed. And that gets back to the point of, this is why I wanted to kind of stir up some questions here, because this is something that if that's true, we go back and look at it, and maybe there's a adjustment that can be made versus waiting another 50 years for an adjustment. I think this is something we should be iterating on, maybe even yearly, not even 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. I think Stan had a question, then you had a question.
One other point of the plan that I think is critical is the plan for the first time recognizes that ARES needs to be able to send other forms, other formats of messages other than NTS.
Yeah.
In other words, we got to be able to send 213 if that's what our agencies use, and that's groundbreaking.
Right. So for folks that may not have been able to hear Stan, he talked about the messaging and how it's important that within NTS or messaging that we're doing, it's not just the NTS radiogram. We're not replacing it, but we have to be able to handle any format an agency wants us to use. And I think that is very important because they don't speak our radiogram. Now, let's face it, the 213 and the radiogram aren't terribly different, but there are differences. And we have to be able to give them the format that they want because they're the folks that we're serving. But we're not replacing anything that we're doing.
Aries Connect is fantastic as an education blog. And I'm wondering if there's any plans in the future to have an experience part of this and also a deployability part of this. Because right now, when I look at Aries Connect, someone could have gone through and taken all of that classwork, and I can't tell them that they're actually useful and employees.
Right. So the question here was around Aries Connect and tracking people and their requirements, their training that they have, and so forth, and that there needs to be more data in there. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus. I'm pretty limited in my Aries Connect work right now. We've had a database that's tracked this ourselves, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we eventually migrate to Aries Connect for this aspect? And that's one of the things that we're tracking. But I think that I think there's definitely going to be more changes in work to the volunteer hub to help with local sections. And Stan's got a comment.
Section manager of Ohio is waist deep in Connect. One of the things that we're trying experimentally is a notes box for ECs only. So that EC can put something in that notes box that only the management level could see about additional information about a potential operator. So that might answer some of those issues.
Yeah, I think that answers part of it. I would say that I think the next step would be to have the ability for the people that are registered within Aries to be able to update that too, because I can tell you that if we have roughly 600 Aries members in Eastern Mass, and to have the ECs put notes for all their different groups is going to be quite a bit of work, and do things get missed. Putting as much as you can on the members to help update that, along with the leadership being able to do it, gives you kind of two different ways to get those records going. So my feedback to that would be that's a good start, and can we go forward with it that the actual members could update that information.
He doesn't want to do it because there's only one place to put an email address, and it's his. You can't put down the email address of the person actually handling the event. And he doesn't want to get pummeled with all the emails for every event that's put in the district and state.
Right. So for folks that couldn't hear that, apparently there's only one email address that can be put in as events get filed and things change, and there needs to be more people that can actually see that information within the system. I would say all these things we're talking about, everything is possible in software. So if there's things that need to be changed there, I think there's ways to change it. And also, if there's things, the capabilities there, the other piece is, I think, the education piece. I know we've done training at the leadership level, but we haven't gone down further than that as of yet. And I think that's something else that is kind of the next steps as far as Aries Connect goes. Thank you.
Second thing that is a concern to me is we need to recognize our Aries members. So the ones that have gone through the effort of taking executive classes, they need that recognition. Right now, there is no meaningful inclusion in a public manner. I think that's something that really needs to be done with pride to the Aries organization and other organizations that are watching this.
Right. So a couple of things the newly named North Texas SEC is talking about, for folks that couldn't hear them, and for the video, is the fact that Aries Connect, he's having a hard time getting some of his leaders to use it because there needs to be more flexibility and I think some localization of what's their needs are at their local level. Also, some more recognition for folks when they go through the various training classes, that there's recognition, and I think recognition not just at the local level, but in higher levels, that folks are doing that training. So I think that's some good feedback there. So something else that can be taken into account as the system evolves.
One thing we've done in Oklahoma is the folks that have certain training and have a position, EC, DEC, all the different positions, there is a bar that hangs under their badge that is a military designation, whether it be like corporal, colonel, major, general, whatever. It's a military designation that, for instance, Oklahoma Highway Patrol recognizes, they understand what it means. They look for somebody with the part of the badge that they see as important. And it makes it a lot easier because they don't understand what a DEC is. They don't understand any of that. But the bar that we put under the badge allows them to recognize people that are in authority that can help them. And not the other police officers recognize that. It's worked very well in Oklahoma, and we do it through the sign man in Baton Rouge. And in fact, on their website, you'll see there's a bar underneath it. There's one select bar for Oklahoma. And so you might even think about that. Talk to Mark Connell, ISEC. He was on the committee that helped write all this, but not what we need to be on.
All right. EC starts at level 3. So yeah, so I think that's I think an excellent point of feedback to bring back into the committee. Yeah, so they're going to look at that. So shifting gears a little bit, how many folks in the room actually work with the agencies as leadership and such? So a number of folks in the room. This is good. So part of I think a lot of good feedback on the plan. We can jump back to that if there's other questions. But one of the other things I want to hit and also talk to folks in the room. Also, Marty has joined us, so I may start with Marty to give some feedback on this and then go down the panel. One of the things I think in amateur radio that we're working on that I think, first of all, the dialogue in this room is awesome, right? We have a new plan. Like any new plan, it's not perfect. It's, we talked about a couple of things here that in a nice constructive way that I think can get fed back and adjusted. That's great, right? Because no plan is perfect. So same thing with our served agencies and also within our groups. I found that some of the best things I've been able to ever do in amateur radio is when everybody's working together and we may not agree on things, but we're able to make adjustments or get to a point where we're able to move things forward. So I'd like to kind of go down this path a little bit about working with agencies, working amongst ourselves to get that real teamwork force multiplier effect going. And I know this morning I had a real good discussion with Marty and Sarah on some of this. This also gives Marty a chance to introduce himself. And Marty, I also said as part of it, what got you involved in amateur radio? So if you want to give that a thing real quick and then give some comments on this topic.
Only got in radio so I wouldn't have to talk in front of other people. Or at least I wouldn't have to look at them while I'm talking to them. So, okay. Well, thanks you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Marty Pittenger. I wear two hats, so I'm going to try to alternate without breaking any ethics here. But I'm a section manager in Maryland. I've been a section manager in Maryland now Once again, I've been elected. I've offered the job to many, and nobody wants it, so I guess I'll take it again. As being a section manager, I get a great opportunity to work with some great folks, especially in the community of communications. And one of the things that I've recognized is that within our organizations, those that are sitting in the room here, what I would like to call the whole radio community communication structure. This is whole community. You know more about your community than any served agency who's rolling into town in a white truck with a satellite dish on the top of it. You know if your school parking lot floods, you know what roads are jammed, you know where people go, and somebody rolls into town and they've got the plan and they open it up and they point and say, this is what we're going to do. And you shake your head like, I don't know. I'm not sure of that. I'll tell you one of the things that we do in Maryland with our emergency section coordinators is we try to keep them really as situational awareness experts. And that is, I want you to draw, and I've got a map here. It's a map of Maryland. It's a big map. Excuse me a second. Time to go. That's the right way? Nope. Courtesy of the Maryland Highway Administration. Oh, thank you. Courtesy of the Highway Administration, they actually make large format for people who can't see well, like old people like me. So what I tell my communicators is I want you to draw a 10-mile diameter circle around where you live. And then I want you to identify all the served agencies in that circle. Elder care, child care, orphanages, hospitals, all of those things. That's your responsibility as a communicator. Because you're situational in that area. It could be larger in your area. It could be smaller in a metropolitan area. That's what you know the most about. Okay? So someone says, oh, we have a disaster, and last time I checked, tornadoes don't stop at county lines. They skip right over those. This, by the way, is the Chesapeake Bay. It's a 104-mile long bathtub. So when the hurricane starts down here, it sloshes out this end. And so we're on a major transportation modal infrastructure. All these little red lines you see are all the train tracks that carry all those things that we get every day. Do you know about this? You know radio, right? You know your served agencies, but someone's going to ask you a question. Like, are you near such and such? And you're going to get on your radio and you're going to call somebody who might know. Well, that's not any good. So having this situational awareness is important, and that's what makes whole community radio communications important to us because we're communicators. Thanks, gentlemen. You can just lay it right down there for me. There is a gap. The gap is that you have served agencies that they do business, and then you have other communicators that they do their business. I see Ross here. Hi, Ross. Haven't seen you in a long time. Shares, Mars, there's a whole bunch of them. We do business a particular way to a served agency. They tell us what we should do, and we do it, right? And you heard earlier, if they got a message to send. I was in Puerto Rico, so I'm going to switch hats for a second. I was in Puerto Rico with a served agency and saw firsthand, a month after the devastation, actually before that, Hams had coordinated communications between Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and stateside. I was able to actually hold the piece of paper that had phone numbers on it. Because what the Hams had done was they realized that, hey, the rule book is out the window, but we know how to communicate. And they coordinated with the community, with the municipalities down there, and said, if you can come here and tell us who you want us to call, we'll get your name to your loved ones in the States. They were doing about 15 to 20 calls an hour to the States. And then they would call their families, and they would say, your aunt, your sister are all okay. What do we call that type of message in messaging when you send a message that someone's okay? It's a welfare traffic. Were they using radiograms? No. Were they serialized? Nope. They even said, I'm sorry, I can't take an inbound message. I'm trying to get outbound messages done first. Because you're good communicators. You know, hey, by the way, traffic's got to move, and right now the priority is to get it out, not in. Okay? We challenge ourselves to try to somehow match our VOADs. Nobody knows what that is, right? There you go. VOADs, non-government or NGOs, and we've got our non-disaster organizations. Can you think of a non-disaster organization that we serve, that we support, that we use our communication skills for? Parks and Recreation. I think of March of Dimes. How many of you have been involved in runs and walks and marathon? Look. Tell me that's not austere in some cases, right? You're under a tent in the blazing sun with a bottle of water and a radio, and you're supposed to, right. So our job is to fill the gap. We do that really, really well. When the agency comes to you and says, we want you to fill this gap, we have to educate them. We have to show them what we can do, because we already know what we're doing right. And they don't know. A lot of these VOADs and organizations, even Red Cross, Saturn, and all that, they don't have radio communications anymore. They whip out their cell phone. They're like, oh, I'll just use the phone. Yes, I agree with you. Cell phones are very reliant, resilient, and ubiquitous in the United States. But if you go other places, or even some places in remote, cell's coverage is not reliable, right? So we have to fill this gap. We do that very well. Served agencies come to us as, we need you to do this. You're the radio operator. How many of you are RACES members? How many of you do CERT? How many of you do MARS? I'm not going to ask how many of you do radio. Look, the hands hardly change, right? When we like one thing, we do it all, right? We're good at what we do. So the last few things I want to talk about is we have to give guidance. That is, for example, when it's time for your served agency or your VOAD or your community group, you should be starting the conversation on what kind of radio communications or communications plan B do you want. You already know what your agencies use. They're about to go out and get a grant from the power company, and they're going to go out and buy camp radios from Walmart. Or they're going to buy a bunch of Vofang radios, and they're going to use them wherever they turn them on. That's the frequency they're on. Okay? Right? The disaster map, not like the one I just showed you, is the spectrum map. In disasters, the disaster map is the spectrum map. Where you are on the spectrum map really defines how big and how serious or how devastating disaster is. How many of you agree? If you're on HF, we're not going to be talking to Columbus, Ohio, really. But in Puerto Rico, to Texas, to Louisiana, to Maine, that's possible. Second, shared communications. How many people know what interoperability is? How many of you know what a P25 radio is? Does a P25 radio have channel 9 CB on it? Interoperability is a falsehood. There's no such thing. And when you go to served agencies, they want their communication system, and they want your communication system never to touch. And if it does touch, it has to go through some sort of, who knows what, magic box. When really all we need to do is educate them that all we need to have is situational awareness. That's what they get from us as hams, is situational awareness. They do. They put you in the EOC, the fire department, the police department for situational awareness, because they realize that they've spent millions of dollars on radio systems that are interoperable. They can connect them, but they're not interoperable. And the last thing is there is no nationwide recognition of what amateur radio, other than what it might have been perceived as, our grandfathers, grandmothers, brothers and sisters might have been doing. I think the recognition has lapsed. So the only way to reinforce that, in Ohio, great. In other places, not so great. Copy what they're doing, you might get better at it. But in Maryland, for example, we are redoing ARES, and we're using ARES Connect as basically a stepping stone to say, look, we're going to start over. Okay? National Traffic System, another good example. Maybe we should start over. All right? So that's all I've got. Is that okay?
That's good.
All right, good. Because I ran out of notes.
You ran out of notes. And it was good to use an old-fashioned map. So you don't see that too often. An old-fashioned map.
No, this is 2019. This isn't old.
Oh, yes. It's 2019 updated, but older, the old technology. So anyways, questions for Marty, questions on I think he went through a good overview of technical and also non-technical relationships. Uh-oh, Marty has something else.
No, I have a question right now.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
police officer.
Okay.
In the Midwest, you guys have tornadoes, hurricanes, and stuff from the East Coast. West Coast, where I came from, you don't have that. The one that always exists is when you talk to people, you're talking to a captain, a lieutenant, a sergeant, or somebody in communications. The person in the field has no idea who you are, what you're doing. You're not going to the line. I can just go, I have a badge and a gun. I can walk past anyone I want to. They'll get down and say, get out of here, even though you've been assigned. They have to get some people trained, either the ECs or other people that are trained. All the major police agencies in this country have yearly training plus academies. All the police agencies allow guest speakers for 1 hour or 2 hours to come in and discuss things, like the Red Cross. All those, when you come in and talk to the people being trained or talk to the retraining, where you say, here's what we do. So they're aware of it and answer questions as based on what we do and what they want. So you meet with your captains, and you can here's who we are. The second part is maybe
Well, let me hold you for there for just a second. Did everyone hear what he had to say, or I can repeat that? Okay. So what he's offering is that there needs to be a way of mentoring to train those people as to what we do. The second half is,
I have one that says Clark County Aries races.
okay,
A big deal. Walk up to a line, and they'll say, oh, okay, now we get along well with the fire department. Both of us work in the communications center during New Year's Eve and all that stuff. But we went to one location up in Montana. And what Homeland Security does, because they have a problem, they cover that Aries races covers all the way to Friday Island and all that in the Pacific. Homeland Security came down background check and issued cards that said Department of Homeland Security Communications.
yes.
Get them across everything. So when they're assigned for a disaster, or an emergency, you don't have to say, yeah, but it says right here. They have an official card. I think the NRL has looked, you know, the NRL card, who cares about the EC?
Yes, of course.
Who cares? When you come up and say, I'm here, I'm assigned by them to come and do this, at least it gets you started. I mean, to tell you how bad, we had a rookie police officer during the floods in Alvisa who turned away a fire truck because he wasn't authorized.
Okay, so
So you have that kind of thing, but we need the communications and we need the identification other than a radio group saying who we are to help. That way there's a flow, and get that flow of communication going.
So what he said was that there needs to be a way of identifying, as it was mentioned, that Ryan was talking earlier, about being able to identify the resource or asset that's being used. Okay, so let's go back to basics for just a second. Everyone's familiar with ESF. Everybody knows what lifelines are, kind of the end results, right? So when you walk into some place and the log chief says, what are you here for? And you go ESF 2, he knows about where you need to be. And then someone there will take your hand and move you along. You're a communicator, right? So your first question is, you see that there needs to be gap filling in the mentoring of, I would say both sides, agency and private, on the capabilities. I mean, Ross can talk about shares, but probably, you know, he knows everything there is about shares. Okay, I don't even think I know what that stands for, but I'm just kidding. But to have that knowledge is important because it gives you that type of situational awareness. Because an EM, emergency manager, will throw you out of the EC if you walk in there and someone says, talk to the log chief, and you say, who's that? Or what is that? Right? Have any of you worked DX? You know what happens when you're working somebody who's never done it? How's it feel? You're like, no, that's not where I live. That's my call area. You're what? Think about it on the other side. The served agency doesn't understand your lingo, and you may not understand those. But the common thing, the NIMS and ICS gives commonality. As far as identification, it works this way. When I was in Texas, people were evacuating. And I asked one of the security people, when people started to come back to Texas, are you letting them in? Because I was there for urban search and rescue. And this is what I was told by, what do you call them, Texas Rangers? Huh? Department of Public Safety. And he goes, of course, because everybody in Texas owns a gun. I was like, wow, no need a badge, okay? But do you know what he said to me? I'm going back to help my neighbors because they saw me leave. The question about Aries, Matt, there's a prime example. It doesn't stop at the state line, and you have to go over there to help. So until we get to the point of commonality, so everybody's on the same page, it's always going to be a struggle. But it's really localized. Unless you're going at a national level, then you're going under the served agency as a representative, right? Question right next to you. Oh, your other half, okay.
We've moved from Nevada to Tennessee, and when we register our vehicle, if you show that you're part of Aries, you show the badge and all that, they give you a license plate with your call sign, and it says emergency.
Right, so they were saying that when we move from one state to another, when you show your credentials, you get some recognition of a license plate. Unfortunately, in the department, in DHS, years ago, what they decided to do was take the stickers, even the military for you, they took the stickers off the windows. You know why they did that, right? What was that? Security risk, because you could be targeted, okay? I mean, I'm sure that people come into Hamvention just followed the other ham in front of them, because you knew who they were and where they were going. And I'm sure that when you get to the gate, if you got a yellow badge or a vendor or whatever it is, the people who are checking just recognize that that's some bit of authority. So it goes back to what you said, the recognition of that the capability. You're right. If you're going to go help, they know you're there to do that. We have to be very careful, though. Let me just say this. I say it again and again. We have to be very careful. I'm sure all of you are professionals in some way, and you respect the responsibilities of being a communicator. But you know, we all know the stories of a few bad apples, ambulance chasers, who show up at the EOC and claim they're there on behalf of the ARRL, okay? Because they have a badge. We know that. We do a very good job at policing ourselves. So if we do that, we have the same recognition. We can recognize bad apples, I hope. It is an education, and we're trying to fill the gap. So it's not going to get easy. Some states do better than others. In Maryland, they do not recognize any other badge except the state authorized. In the government, if you're not wearing a PIV badge, I don't care who you are. Same thing in Massachusetts, okay? It has to start at this level, at the community level. Have your community leaders informed that, oh, by the way, if you need us, we can't show up. That's what they did with the power company in Puerto Rico. They excluded them. They said, it doesn't matter. If they're in a power truck, they're allowed to go through. Cable companies allowed to go through. Because we know they're going to the disaster. Texas was the same way. Okay? Does that answer your question? All right. I'll do this. Oh, one back here.
Needs to happen at a public level so that we know help with the MS-150. The sponsors should be talking about, hey, we have 50 amateur radio operators helping out during this. We need that publication. We need to come down.
So are you familiar with RSF? R, Romeo, Sierra, Foxtrot, RSF?
Someone, yeah.
All right, does anybody know what RSF is? Some of you should know. Yeah, we of course over here on the government side know. They know everything. RSF is actually the combination of ESF in certain areas. You've heard of lifelines, for example. So give you an example. You're doing a shelter, or you're doing a community, let's say a gated community or an island community. The resource function is that we have certain resources that we have to put those components into, okay? If you live, like you said, if you live Nevada to Tennessee, that's not exactly the same place, okay? All right, but if you're in an area, for example, when's the last time a hurricane hit Idaho? Anybody here from Idaho can tell me that? Anybody not from Idaho can tell me? Yeah, it never has, okay? So in the RSF world, it's kind of like that, right? There's certain aspects of the ESF that are grouped together in RSF. The communication starts, and I've been in these meetings with MEMA, Maryland Emergency Management Agency, when they have their RSF meeting. Because what you have is you have the ESF2, the ESF6, the 12, the 15, but then you have Maryland Emergency Operations shelters. You have child care. We have a large population of foreign workers that come in that work the resorts during the summertime. Here comes Joaquin. They're going to move them 200 miles. 13,000 non-residents moved 200 miles. That's an RSF function. So you're absolutely right. Go to those meetings, be a spokesman at your level and your SM and your division director. That's where the weight comes from. And then the league. All right? Does that answer your question? All right. Exactly. All right.
One thing you can sum up a lot that people are talking about in one word, and that's credentialing.
Is what?
Credentialing.
Credentialing. Tough word in some places.
Very tough.
Right? Maryland's coming up. How many of you seen the TSA report or TSA thing that says you have to have a certain license or you don't get on a plane? Really? States are having credentialing problems? Really? I mean, come on. So credentialing is a negativity, is a negative word in my vocabulary. It's not credentials. Because I don't want you I as a section manager, I as an emergency coordinator, do not want you at the EOC. If the EOC needs people, they know where to find them. I need you at the school, the church, the elder care. I need you to be in situational awareness in your area. And you're already credentialed in your community.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is getting your community to help work.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Because you're tired of seeing me and listening to me, I'm sure. All right. So I'm the section manager in Maryland. And by the way, watch this. My first Hamvention. That's only because they don't give me enough time to come out on vacation to Hamvention. But thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Rob.
Oh, thank you very much. So why don't we do this? Why don't, we had, I think, a lot of good topics, gone through here. Let's walk through the panel for further commentary on each, and then we can summarize everything up with a little more Q&A up until the end of the panel.
So my thoughts are the word interoperability. We talked about the Northcom exercise. We do 3 of those exercises a year. The MARS program, we are tasked by DOD to do a couple of things. One of those things is to interface with this audience to collect situational awareness information about what's going on under a worst day type of scenario. And that's what we try to exercise during these vital connection exercises, as well as the DoD quarterly COMEXs. That's one of our focuses is to interface with you. One of our focuses is also to interface with Ross Merlin and the DHS shares. I colloquially think of DHS shares as the federal government's MARS program. They bring together the critical infrastructure and key resource part of the information situational awareness that we're all going to need under that worst day scenario. So that's really our focus from the MARS program.
Wow, you stole. I think Paul stole my thunder there, but Paul's looks at it from a little bit different perspective than I do, in that he works for the Army and I work for the Air Force. So I support the U.S. Air Force. Paul supports the Army. And we support the DoD together, so we partner all the time. So it's great. I wore a blue uniform when I was in Air Force. Paul wore a green uniform. We target a little bit different audience, but we come together as a team and support those particular activities that we do. So, Paul, you stole the thunder, but that's good. But I'll pass this on to Malcolm here. So, thank you.
I really can't think of a whole lot more to add. Marty's input was fantastic. The Civil Air Patrol, for those of you who don't know, our communication system is really inwardly directed. We provide communications resource for the flying mission of the Civil Air Patrol. So we use a lot of the same skill sets and we interact, work in the same community, but our job is a little bit different than some of these others. So, and I really can't think of anything else to add unless there's any questions for me, and I will yield the balance of my time for the distinguished gentleman from Shares who will use it. I should have skipped him.
The distinguished gentleman from Shares couldn't be here, so I'll speak. So this is not the first time we've referred to the Shares program as being like the civilian Mars program. But if we were, we would be the hippie Mars program, because we're very accommodating in our rules and requirements. We try hard not to be a burden on the people who can use our resources. So where other programs you have to participate a certain number of hours per quarter, send in a monthly report, in Shares it's like, yeah man, whatever, cool, you drop by when you can, we're good. And part of the reason for that cultural difference is they have a very specific and very serious mission. And the Shares mission is serious, but it's not as specific. Our mission is to support your mission. And by you, I don't mean amateur radio, I mean state government, territorial, tribal government, private voluntary organizations, critical infrastructure, key resources. All right? It's the folks who are originating and receiving national security and emergency preparedness messages. We're here to help them do their mission. We're not using them to achieve our mission. So as amateur radio, you wouldn't consider us a served agency of amateur radio. We're a partner agency. We're not, although we can do some of the same things as amateur radio, we're not competing against amateur radio to serve the same people. There's a few things we can do in Shares that you can't do in amateur radio. We can use encryption. We can use higher data throughput with no limitation on symbol rate. And I feel like Rick Perry. Department of Energy. No, wait, what's the other thing we can do? Oh, yes, we can have HF radio operated by people who don't have an operator license. In the federal government, fixed service, there is no operator license requirement. Whoever's responsible for the station determines who's competent to operate the radio. So there are many facilities, served agencies, where you just can't have volunteers from the community come into that space. A nuclear power plant, prison, some parts of the hospital. But you can't have employees there. So the Shares program lets the people who are already at that facility operate the radio, get the critical information, contribute to situational awareness, while you, the volunteer, have to get home from work, go through traffic, check in with a spouse, feed the dog, go through more traffic, and then maybe get to that same place to help, if you even can get in. Well, they've been manning the radio for the 2 hours, that critical time at the beginning, and if it's, say, a hospital, and they're medical people, they don't want to operate the radio. They want to do medicine. They're happy if they have a relationship with community volunteers. They're very happy that you can come and relieve them so they can get back to their primary function. But you have to have that relationship. You have to have that trust. So I want to use that as the lead-in to address two of the comments from the audience here. One was about why should you go through all that extra effort to get to the level 2 ARIES? So you've probably all heard this little joke before, but we'll dust it off one more time. Do you know what the difference is between being involved and being committed? Think of the ham and eggs breakfast. The chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. Okay, so if I'm a government agency or an emergency operations center or any critical function, and you show up and you want to help, you know how motivated and dedicated and competent and good-looking you are. But I don't know you from Adam. You're just another Bubba trying to get into my space. Now, if I know you've put in the effort to do ICS 100, 200, 700, 800, taken the AUXCOM training, maybe done the position task book, I see a commitment. I'm more likely to trust you with the safety of the people I'm responsible for, not to mention my reputation. But if you just say, well, I've signed up for ARIES, but I couldn't be bothered doing all that stuff, I'm not likely to trust you. So if you're looking for the motivation to get to that level, it's the expectations and the confidence of your served agency. Getting to that second level is a good indication that you may be someone I could trust. Okay, the other comment I wanted to address was about state-issued or government-issued credential, right? Good, very good point. We had that, and we blew it. It was RACES, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. Now, I'm I'm very literal and a well-known nitpicker. So I would say there is no such thing as joining RACES, and there's no such thing as a RACES organization. When you think you're joining RACES, RACES is a radio service. You don't join the Maritime Mobile Service. You don't join the broadcast service. When you think you're joining RACES, you're joining the Emergency Management Organization Volunteer Program. That's what you're joining. The emergency manager has access to the private land mobile radio service, police, fire, EMS, emergency management radios, and they have access to the radio amateur civil emergency service. And if you're registered with them, then you may be qualified to operate in RACES. So when we had a vibrant RACES program in government, that was your official connection as an amateur radio operator to an official government function. You're not just a bubba who wants to help, who might or might not be qualified. You've demonstrated that commitment by registering your person and your equipment with an emergency management agency, and you have made the commitment to live up to some expectation, some service level agreement. Okay, a problem we have in Aries is we so want to be called out that we offer our services to everybody, and then we live in fear that if there's a big emergency and they all call us, we won't have enough people to meet their needs and we might look bad. When you have a RACES program, you're committed to be essentially a first responder to that agency, and if there's excess capacity, maybe you'll help somebody else. So when you had that relationship with emergency management, they can do the background check. They can issue you a government credential that will be accepted at the checkpoint or the access control point or whatever. But somewhere along the line, we developed a competitive nature, RACES against Aries. I know some of you have organizations, RACES, Aries, RACES, that's all well. But in some states, it's competing organizations that hate each other with a passion, right? It's dogs and cats. This is terrible. So we need to realize that if we're now at that point that we need a government-issued credential, let's go back to what worked in the past, look at it again. That RACES relationship said you made a commitment to emergency management, and emergency management made a commitment to you by doing the effort for validation and verification and recognition that gives you more of an opportunity to help. All right, what's old is new again. There's no other. In California, they have registered disaster service workers. All right, that's the same idea on a much larger scale, not just radio. The only other analog to that is the RACES for that official connection. So perhaps we need to look at that again as the way of making that official connection to be able to do what we want to do, to be accepted by those we're trying to help. Is that a question or a hint? That's a hint. Okay.
It's a hint. It's a hint. So, and I think you brought up, Ross, a good point about, RACES and Aries and some of the past and going the back and forth between the two programs. And this is where I think, Marty's point about looking at it as it's all radio, it's all resources working together is very important. And that'll is a segue for Sarah to kind of round out our panel along the relationship side.
No pressure. So I want to thank you again, Rob, for inviting me to join today. And I'll get out of the way of that. My job with FEMA External Affairs has been very focused on building partnerships. We have a number of folks in our shop who are hams and across the agency who are really, really avid participants in the ham community. I think from my standpoint of being someone who develops a lot of messages, right, it's my job to also have a relationship between ESF 15 External Affairs and ESF 2 Communications so that we can be more familiar partners. So I had a good conversation earlier with Mr. Merlin about, what does it mean when you say tower's down? I mean, to ESF 15, that just means you can't use it. To ESF 2, that might sound like it is physically down, and you're going to solve that problem differently. So even just between our two emergency support functions, if we don't have a relationship and an understanding of how we talk with each other, how we're what our mission focus is, how we accomplish that mission, we're not going to be able to work as efficiently when the pressure's on. If I may build off of some of what folks have been saying too, if there have been ideas presented here about, looking for new partnerships in your community, I encourage you to chat with your sections about that, right? Chat with them about maybe what has been attempted before, what you could try. You may or may not be aware there's a national level exercise coming up called Shake and Fury. So New Madrid zone scenario, right? Maybe whether or not you are in that affected area, or especially if you are, consider what would your section do that might help contribute to outcomes. Talk to your EC about that, right? See what their goals are for the exercise. Are there things that you can exercise as a section that can help support that? And we can build our capabilities and learn from each other in a low risk environment, right? In a no fault environment. Building that familiarity and trust also opens up new ideas, right? So you might realize that there are organizations that there was a lack, for example, of situational awareness. It's been a common theme, right? About the status of a certain type of facility, maybe it's nursing homes, for example, right? So that can lead to new ideas about, what is the best way to reach out and build partnerships and build relationships with those facilities? And in all of that, you really are just, you're building your community from the ground up, right? So we talk all the time that emergencies are local first. We learn from you what the needs are. FEMA is always asking, rolling down, what are the locals seeing? What are the locals needing? In a lot of my work that focuses on building new partnerships, we're constantly trying to see which populations, before, during, and after disasters, are underserved. Who's not getting the information they need? Whose needs are we not aware of to be able to serve them better? And so I think a lot about this relationship between ESF2 and ESF15 as how we transmit information to understand the impacts on the ground and the outcomes that we can help deliver for a community, right? Maybe that information is somebody saying a facility is up or down, and that's an impact that we need to react to, right? Maybe somebody's transmitting a wellness check, right? That's really critical information. And maybe somebody is transmitting, from my perspective, we do a lot of public messaging. Maybe we need to know that people in the area aren't evacuating because they heard that all the gas stations are out. Well, we need to maybe double check that, do some logistics work, and get information back out to them so that they can take appropriate action. So whether it's decision-making happening by emergency managers and coordinators or by the general public, that two-way communication is so critical. And the relationship between ESF 2 and 15 is so critical. So I thank you, Rob, for this panel, and I encourage you to pick something that you heard today and try and take it back to your community, because it's your community and you have the power to do that.
So I think that's a great way to close it out, and because I know we're just about out of time, and I'll just throw in my last 2 cents on situational awareness. So certainly you say, well, when does amateur radio provide situational awareness? All the Skywarn nets we do, all the information that's generated from that, some of the things that Marty talked about, knowing you're nearby something that could be a critical infrastructure and making sure it's open or not. These things are very critical, and I think Marty's point about the fact that we're able to provide that, we're there to provide situational awareness. I can tell you in the state of Massachusetts, that's been our #1 role, is situational awareness. That is the thing that they look at amateur radio for more than ever. So just want to emphasize that point. And I think Sarah's point about taking something back you learned today or some of the answers to the questions and making it whole locally at the community level is a very important thing, and I think hopefully you got something from that today. With that, I appreciate everyone's attention to the panel discussion today. A number of us are here. Some of us are here through the end of the day. Some of us are here through tomorrow, and a few of us for the entire Hamvention. Stop by if you have a question, and if you see us roaming around Hamvention, don't be afraid to approach us if you think of something to ask. Appreciate everyone's time, and thank you very much.